Do you like writing letters?
No, I don't.
I don't really like to write them that much, no. Yeah, I write a lot of letters.
Hello and welcome to How to Punctuate Well and How to Write a Perfect Letter. Now, if you're one of those people who really doesn't look forward to writing letters, then let me assure you, you are not alone. What we want to do in this video is to take the pain which many of us feel out of the letter writing process. We want to make things as easy as they can possibly be for you. We're going to look at many of the different types of letters which we have to write in connection with everyday situations, from letters of complaint to letters asking for action or applying for a job. Meanwhile, we'll cover all the main points of punctuation, which most of us probably haven't paid attention to since our school days. Here's a letter without much punctuation in it. And you can see the meanings of some things are dubious. Does the writer mean house, cats and plants as a list of separate items, or house cats as one thing and plants as another? Well, here's the same letter with punctuation. And you can see immediately that a reader can easily understand the letter, so punctuation is important. But more of that later. We'll cover everything from the correct use of semicolons to the use of paragraphs and the length of sentences. Now, we've grouped this tape into sections covering different types of letters, and within each section we've covered some major points about punctuation. You should always remember that this video is a practical guide, and don't forget that if you find that you can't remember a particular point which we've covered, you can always rewind and watch it all over again. So, let's introduce ourselves to letters. Now, there can be nothing worse than sitting, staring at a blank piece of paper, knowing what you want to say, but not really knowing how to say it. Well, we've spoken to many people about this and taken advice from those who write just a few letters a year to those who write many letters every day. And what they all seem to be saying is that you should never have to start with an empty sheet. Now, for each type of letter, you can assume that there will be a master, or as those involved with computers would call it, a template. Now, a master, or a template, is simply a standard letter. Sometimes it's so standard that all you have to do is fill in the names, the times, and the places, and you have the perfect letter. However, in most situations, you will have to alter the master somewhat. But it is much easier to start with something and alter it, rather than to start with nothing at all. This will save you a lot of time and will make letter writing a whole lot easier. Do you know how you would lay out an informal letter?
Well, up at the top left, the address, and the date on the right.
Over goes in the middle, does it? Somewhere?
Well, your address goes on the top right, then their address goes a bit low down on the left. Then you put dear and you set it in, like you don't have paragraphs, you'll set it in, and at the end you put yours faithfully.
Two different styles of layout can be used when you're writing letters. You can either use the indented or staggered style, or the block style. But whichever style you decide to use, you should only use one style within each letter. Now, one of the difficulties which many people find with letters is the formality of the way in which you lay the letters out. Many of us were taught what's known as the staggered or indented style in school, whereas nowadays the block style, which we'll come on to talk about in a minute, is most often used. But that doesn't mean to say that one is absolutely right or absolutely wrong. These two different styles can be used for letter writing, either the indented or the block. However, whichever style you decide to use, you should only use one of the styles within each letter. That's a very important thing to remember. Now, if you were to write an informal letter, you're more likely to use the indented or staggered style. So, let's have a look at exactly what this means in an informal letter, say to a friend or a relation. With this more old-fashioned style, the address is staggered. So, you start at the top of the page in the right-hand corner with the first line of your address, 5 Hatch End, and you put a comma after the number of the house and then again at the end of the line. Move on to the next line, and this is where the indentation takes place, because you start the next line, Sim Hall, by moving in one space. So the S goes underneath the comma. So you've indented it by one space. Put a comma at the end of the line and go down to the next one. Again, indent by one space, put the B of Bradford under the I of Sim Hall, a comma again, and then come down to do the postcode, moving in one space. This time, don't put a comma or a full stop at the end of the line. Now we need to write the date. And using this particular style, the date is written against the right-hand margin. Again, we use punctuation. So after missing a line, you should write the 11th of August, comma, then 1992. Now, if this is an informal letter, you don't have to write the person's name and address. So leave a few lines and move over to the left-hand margin where you'll write dear whoever, dear Ange, let's say. Now we start the indentation again. Don't forget to put a comma after the name. Then, on the next line, indent your first paragraph by a couple of centimetres or so before you begin the main body of the letter. Hi, how are you? Hope you're in good spirits, and so on. When you want to start a new paragraph, take a new line, go to the left-hand margin and move in a couple of centimetres or so before you begin writing. I suppose I'd better tell you right away, etc. You don't miss a line between paragraphs when using this indented style. But once you've finished your letter, move to the centre of the page and sign off with lots of love or best wishes, and then sign your name below, Diane. If you're writing a more formal letter, then you're much more likely to use the block style. This is the style used in the business world. Now, you should note that the block style can change according to whether you're using a computer or your hand. If you're writing by hand, then start writing the letter by putting your address in the top right-hand corner of the page. But note that you don't indent any of the lines, and neither do you use any punctuation in the address. Now, if you were using a computer to do this, then you might use what's called a right justification, and this will put the end letter in each line hard onto this right-hand margin. Well, now you miss a line before you write the date, and there are two alternatives for the position of the date on this particular line. You can either write the date hard up against the left-hand margin, like it is here, or against the same margin as your address. Again, there's no punctuation in the date. Then you miss a couple of lines below that and move to the left-hand margin of the page. Now here you write the name of the person, Mr. Colin Sponger, or whoever it might be, or the organisation which you're writing to. You complete the address, again without any punctuation or indentation. Then miss another line or two before writing the greeting, which will either be dear sir or madam, if you don't know the name of the person you're writing to, or dear Mr. Sponger, or whoever, if you do. Then you miss a line and make sure that each paragraph starts hard onto this left-hand margin, leaving a line between each paragraph. And when you've finished writing the body of the letter, there are two commonly used formal ways of signing off. The first one is to write yours faithfully, and you would use this if you were writing a letter beginning dear sir or madam. And a handy way of remembering this is that you have F for faithfully and F for extremely formal. You'd use yours sincerely to sign off when you've addressed the person by name, as A. Poorman did in the letter to Mr. Colin Sponger. A common error is to confuse yours sincerely with yours faithfully. Well, one way to remember is to never put the S's together, meaning never put sir with sincerely. If you remember this, then you can work out that you always use faithfully with sir or madam, or perhaps you can remember madam faithfully and Mr. sincerely, visualising two different people. After writing yours sincerely or yours faithfully, you then miss a line before signing your name at this left-hand margin. And below your signature, you should type your name or print it in block capitals if you're handwriting a formal letter. Once you're happy with the letter, you'll need to address the envelope. Now, the address, for obvious reasons, is written in the centre of the envelope, and the lines of the address can either be staggered or written with a straight edge. It can help if you write the town or the city in block capitals, and you should also include the postcode. If you aren't sure of the postcode for the address, then phone up the company or the person you're writing to and ask them. It really does help the letter to get to its destination a lot faster. Do you like writing letters?
Yes.
Why?
To give them the news about myself, about the area I'm living, around, the people around me, give them some news and things like that.
I like writing letters to people, friends.
Love letters.
Now, informal letters are generally much easier to write than formal ones. Why are they easier? Well, normally because you actually want to write the letter rather than having to write it. The style and tone of an informal letter will depend, quite obviously, upon the relationship between you and the person you're writing to. You can think of an informal letter as a one-sided conversation, but having said that, it doesn't mean that you should just write your thoughts as you think them. It's much easier to arrange your thoughts beforehand and then begin to write. You should also use a new paragraph for each new topic that you write about. Now, there's a standard layout which you should use for informal letters, which you'll see here. You can see that we've used the staggered style. You could use the block style if you want, but you don't have to put the person's name and address on the left-hand side as you would in a formal letter. So, your address is in the top right-hand corner. Below that, you leave a space and write the date. Then go across to the left-hand side where you write your greeting, dear Sadie or whoever. Then you start writing the main text of your letter using one paragraph for each different topic. And when you've said all that you want to say, you sign off using lots of love or best wishes or something similar. And then finally put your signature at the bottom. If you decide that you've actually forgotten to say something that's quite important, then you can put a PS or postscript, as it's called, at the bottom. Now you do this by moving to the left-hand side of the page and writing PS and then the piece of information that you forgot. If you've forgotten another piece of information, a second piece, then write PPS below it, postscript. Although it isn't so important in an informal letter, if you're ever writing a formal letter, don't ever include a PS. You should rewrite the letter to include the thought or thoughts that you left out originally. And this is really where drafting a letter first, or writing a list of the points you want to include, will help you when you write your letter. Don't ever expect to be able to sit down and write a perfect letter straight away. You'll need to take time and a little bit of planning and thought. Now, if you've got a computer, this does make life a whole lot easier, as altering every single draft is a very easy thing to do. But what about the content? Well, with a personal letter, the content is really up to you. For example, you could be writing to your parents or your brother with the news of what you've been up to. Once you've finished the letter, you really should ask yourself if the tone is right. Does it say everything that you want it to say? Is the content clear, and is it correct? That is the layout correct? Are there any punctuation or spelling mistakes? Now, this does seem like rather a long list of questions to remember, but in the last section of this video we'll look at all these questions and a few more besides in much more detail, and we'll show you examples of letters before and after they've been checked. Now, you can use this final section of the video as a reference whenever you're checking letters in the future. Now, the chatty type of letter we've just talked about is probably one of the easiest letters to write. However, there are some more difficult personal letters which you may have to write at some time. For example, a letter of sympathy or condolence to someone whose relation or close friend has just died. There aren't any rules, really, for a letter of this type. It's such a personal subject. What you say should come from the heart. You should say exactly what you feel, but try not to ramble with your letter. Try to be concise. You should offer your sympathy and say what you're thinking about the person at this time. The most important thing probably is that you should write to the person as soon as you hear the sad news. The next type of letter we'll be looking at is a letter of invitation or acceptance. Now, these can be either formal or informal. A formal invitation is set out like this. The reply address will be at the bottom left-hand corner, and any reply to accept or refuse such an invitation is also made in an impersonal style and is laid out like this. Your address is written at the top right-hand corner, 24 Mornington Terrace and so on. And you'll note that we've used the block style here, but you can use the staggered style if that's what you want to do. Then write the date below. Now, you don't begin your reply with a Dear Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, but with this. Yasmin Amin thanks Mr. and Mrs. J.D. Peterson for their kind invitation to the marriage of Sarah to David, ending with, and is delighted to attend. You can use this letter as your master for any replies which you may have to write in this manner in the future. To refuse an impersonal invitation, you'd reply in this way. Again, you can use this standard form of refusal in the future. Of course, you can buy ready-made acceptance and refusal cards, but these can be expensive and not as nice for the person to receive, so it can be cheaper and is certainly faster to handwrite a reply yourself. An informal invitation can be in any form, from a handwritten card to purposely bought invitation to an invitation you might have designed yourself. A reply to an invitation of this type would probably be a handwritten informal letter if you were going to write rather than to telephone, as such an invitation is likely to be from a friend or a relation. Well, now we're going to look at an aspect of punctuation, as we will in every single one of the following sections on the video. This time we're going to look at capital letters. Now, capital letters are used for the following reasons: as the first letter in the first word of a sentence. So, I, capital I, can't begin to tell you how sorry I was to hear your sad news. Or capital letters can be used as the first letter of the first word of direct speech or conversation. They said, be home, where the B has a capital letter. Proper nouns including initials, the Y in Yasmin, the A in Armin, or a capital M in Mr. or Mrs. And of course, for the initials. Full stops, well, they're used to show the end of a sentence. No such payments have been made, full stop. How would you lay out a formal letter?
Your address top right, their address left hand slightly down, then an opening paragraph, then the main part of the letter, and then the salutation.
Their address or my address? Goes up in one of the corners.
Well, your address goes on the top right, then their address goes a bit low down on the left. Then you put dear and you set it in, like you don't have paragraphs, you'll set it in, and at the end you put yours faithfully if you don't know them.
We're now going to deal with a whole host of different formal letters, and in all of the following sections we're going to concentrate on the content of these letters, as this is where people have most difficulty. We looked at the layout for all types of formal letters earlier in section 1, so if you need to refer back, simply rewind the tape and watch that again. Now, with some formal letters, it's very useful to write a heading before you start to write the main body of the letter, so that the person reading it knows immediately what you're referring to. The sort of things that you put in a heading would be an order number, or a reference number in connection with a complaint, or a bank account number if you're writing to a bank, or an insurance policy number if you're making a claim to an insurance company. You could also use a heading to highlight the position that you're applying for, if you are applying for a job. You miss a line below your greeting before writing the heading, and the heading can be written in bold to make it stand out. To begin writing the main text of the letter, you miss another line and move to the left-hand margin before beginning to write. Now, the content of your formal letter will obviously vary depending on the reason for writing. There's a whole variety of situations when you would write a formal letter, for example, to apply for a job, to confirm a telephone conversation, to complain, or to request information. In such letters, the content needs to be clear and logical, and the letter should be brief and only contain all the relevant information. The information should be written in an ordered way to make it easy to follow. And the tone of the letter should be impersonal, not chatty, but it should still be polite, even if you're complaining. Here is a list of useful beginnings which you can refer to at any time. These will really help you to start any formal letters that you have to write. We'll leave them up on the screen so that you can refer to them next time you're writing.
Dear Madam.
Dear Mr. Lowe.
Following our telephone conversation of earlier today,
I'm writing on behalf of...
I'm writing to explain...
I am writing to complain!
Dear Grandpa.
I apologise for the delay in replying.
Many thanks for your kind invitation.
Please find enclosed.
With reference to your letter dated...
I am pleased to confirm...
Following our telephone conversation of
I should
earlier
like
today,
to apply for the post of...
I enclose a postal order for £10. Thank you for Mr. President.
I apologise for the delay in replying.
I'm writing on behalf of...
Thank you for your letter.
I am writing to complain!
Sometimes it's better to use formal words to give authority to your letter. Here's a quick list of commonly used words which may help you. For instance, instead of "you owe me," you could say "I'm entitled to." Or, instead of saying "I'm not happy with," you could say "I'm dissatisfied with." The words you use will set the tone of the letter, and you may find that by using formal words in certain circumstances, you will get a better response. Interested, acceptable, returned, convenient, regarding, replacement, application, further details, returned, obtain, I'm entitled to. Once you've written the letter, there are many useful endings which are fairly standard. Look at the following list and refer to it when you want a bit of help with finishing off.
Many thanks.
kind regards, yours faithfully.
Lots of love.
I apologise for any inconvenience caused.
Please let me know if you need any further details.
Kind regards.
Looking forward to hearing from you.
Lots of love.
Please send me further details.
Kind regards.
Yours faithfully.
Many thanks. Yours sincerely. Lots of love.
Now, in the following sections, we'll look at various situations in which you would have to write a formal letter. We'll begin by looking at shorter formal letters first, the ones you may write to a teacher to excuse your child from games, or a letter to confirm that you've received an important item. Then we'll move on to longer formal letters, the ones you might have to write to apply for a job or to complain about faulty goods. In this section, we'll look at the shorter formal letters which you might have to write. For example, a letter applying for tickets to a sporting event, or a letter to school explaining that your child has been ill. Or you may have to write a letter on behalf of someone, or to confirm that an important package has arrived. Now, a letter applying for tickets to a sporting event or a similar event will look something like this. As this letter is addressed Dear Sir or Madam, it's finished off by writing Yours faithfully. A letter about a child missing school or to ask permission for a child to be excused from games may look like this. You may have to write a letter on behalf of someone. You may have to write a letter to confirm that you have received an important package. Let's move on to a very commonly used piece of punctuation, the comma. Now, a comma is used in a whole host of different ways. The first is to show a slight pause in the sentence. So, I'm looking forward to my trip to Italy, comma, though I wish I could travel further. The second way is to separate the items on a list. So the items might be friends, comma, Jarina, comma, Peter and Joe, and so on. Commas can also be used to introduce direct speech. So after Neither said, you would have the comma before you begin the speech. A comma can also be used to separate a less important part of a sentence. I'm writing to confirm that the man's dinner suit, comma, which I ordered 2 weeks ago, comma, arrived this morning. Commas can mark off asides like however or in the meantime, which aren't essential to the sentence. I'm willing, comma, however, comma, and so on. The comma has many uses. The problem is it's often used in the wrong place, instead of a full stop or a colon. So remember this. If you can use a full stop, you should not use a comma. Apostrophes can cause more trouble than any other form of punctuation, as they have two uses which can be confused. The first use is to show that letters have been left out of words. For example, with I'm, where the full-length version is I am, or with Mary's here, meaning Mary is here. The second use of apostrophes is to show ownership. Here, the apostrophe always comes after the ownership word. Some examples. Mary's cat, with the apostrophe after Mary, because Mary has the ownership of the cat. The cat's dinner, where there is one cat. The cat's dinner, where there is more than one cat. The woman's luggage, where there is one woman only. The women's luggage, where there is more than one woman. John Smith's house, meaning the house belonging to John Smith. Or the Smith's house, meaning the house belonging to the Smith family. The most common mistake with apostrophes is made with its and its. To distinguish between them, try to remember that the apostrophe stands for the missing letter. So IT apostrophe S stands for it is. ITS, without the apostrophe, shows possession. For example, the dog wagged its tail.
I say, when is an it not an it?
When it's an IT apostrophe S.
A plain ITS is easy, I guess. It means belonging to it.
A dog wags its tail.
A yacht needs its sail.
And a camel is famed for its spit.
When after the T there's an apostrophe, it means it has what it is.
It's been a long time.
No, it's not mine. You know very well that it's his.
I like writing work experience to newspapers and magazines.
If they've sent you a form, then you just like put most of the personal stuff on the form, didn't you? But in the letter it's just like, dear sir, madam, have you got a vacancy? Thank you very much.
When I write a letter of application, I first of all say what attracted me to the job in the first place, what my qualifications are, which would interest the employer, and also at the end the possibility of perhaps meeting the employer or getting a response of some description.
In this section, we'll look at the two different types of letters you can write when you're applying for a job. Now, you can either write a covering letter, which you would send with a CV, a curriculum vitae, or you could combine a CV and a covering letter into one document. We'll also show you how to write asking for a reference. Since we've already looked at the layout of a formal letter in the first section of the tape, we'll just concentrate on the main text, giving ideas for standard beginnings and endings for different situations. So, let's look at a covering letter. In this case, the covering letter is accompanying an application form for a place in college. But a similar letter could also be sent with a CV. You'll most probably have to fill in a standard application form which you can get from the registrar's office at the college. Now, here are some general hints about the way to put your covering letter together. The letter should be as brief as possible, as the person receiving your application will also have 3 or 4 pages of the application form to read. But the letter should be interesting enough to make sure that your application form is actually read. Now, the content of the letter will be something like this. In the heading, you can write the full title of the course which you're applying for. BTEC First Certificate, Motor Vehicle Engineering. I enclose a completed application form for your motor vehicle engineering course at BTEC First Certificate level. Then add a little bit of information about yourself, explaining your current position. Then add a small paragraph saying why you want to study that particular course. Now, perhaps you don't have the A-levels or GCSEs required for this course, but you would like to know if your work experience could be taken into account. You should mention this in your letter. The final paragraph should say, I look forward to hearing from you soon. Now, as you address the letter to a particular person, you end with yours sincerely. Sign your name below and then print your name. The second type of letter which you can write when applying for a job combines a CV and a covering letter, and it may look something like this. You would most likely be writing in response to an advertisement that you'd seen in a newspaper or a magazine. Make sure that you address the letter to the correct person without any spelling errors, and also say in the letter where you saw the vacancy. A letter of application for a job requires a lot of thought so that you can present yourself in the best possible light. This type of letter should be kept as concise and ordered as possible. It should include all relevant information, including the reasons for your interest in that particular job, and you should also highlight areas of your past experience which make you suitable for the post. You'll probably have to make several attempts at writing this type of letter in order to make sure that you've included everything and that the tone of the letter is absolutely correct. You'll probably have a limited amount of time to write it before the deadline for applications. So it's a good idea to have a list of certain facts about yourself already prepared. It's a good idea to keep a list with dates of the schools you went to and names of your past employers, including the titles of your posts and various duties which you were responsible for. This will really help you every time you apply for a job. And try to keep this list up to date and add to it whenever you do something new. Now, this list should also contain the correct spellings for various names and addresses. A letter applying for a job is obviously very important. You want to create the right impression so that you're invited to an interview. Now, you will probably have to have a few attempts or drafts before you finally have the right letter. We look at drafting in more detail in the last section of the video, and we'll show you the different things you should be checking when you're writing letters, especially important or formal letters. Now, the next type of letter we'll look at is a letter asking for a reference or permission to use someone's name as a referee on your CV. You should always name two people on your CV. One should be your last employer or someone from your last school or college, and the other should be a friend who can give a character reference. Character referees should normally have a good job of their own and shouldn't be from your own family. So a letter asking someone to be your referee could go something like this. Dear Mrs. Henderson, and then in your first paragraph you should ask if they would be willing to be a referee. You should then explain what you've been up to recently and say that you're now applying to go to college. You must make sure that your referee is happy to be your referee, as it would be an absolute disaster if a college tutor or a potential employer contacted someone whose name you'd given as a referee only to find out that he or she doesn't want to vouch for you. You should also ask your referee if they would allow you to include a contact telephone number for them so that any possible employers could contact your referee quickly. Obviously, depending on your relationship with your prospective referee, your letter may be chatty and informal. Well, let's move on to another couple of pieces of punctuation. First of all, question marks. Question marks are used only in direct questions. So you would use one here. When is your sister arriving? Question mark. You don't use a question mark with indirect questions. That is, when the actual words of the question aren't used. I asked when your sister is arriving. No question mark there. exclamation marks help to reinforce emphasis. You use them after exclamations, get a move on, or to express a wish, happy birthday, to emphasize meaning, he wants me to help him, but I won't. Now, the important thing with exclamation marks is not to overdo it, or you'll reduce the impact. And you should never use more than one exclamation mark at a time in a formal letter. The way that you split up the content of your letter is very important. So that your letter can be understood, you should split it into sentences and paragraphs. Now, this is how not to do it. And this is how it should be done. When it's done well, you can immediately see what's being referred to. Now, a sentence is a statement, a command, or a question which is complete and makes sense. A sentence should be used to express one idea, or it should contain information or a statement about a single fact. A group of sentences about the same theme should be grouped together in a paragraph. And if you're in any doubt about how much information you can have in a single sentence, then try to keep that sentence short. You may want to write a letter asking for information about double glazing, or you may want to receive details on how to operate your video recorder or microwave if you've lost the instruction booklet. Or perhaps you'd like to find out about a legendary Scottish sailor. A letter seeking information should be written concisely. It's a good idea to list the different points which you'd like to be answered. How about a letter to an electronics manufacturer asking for instructions for an appliance? Notice the heading referring to the appliance. Now say where you bought the video recorder, what the shop advised you to do, and what you would like from the company.
There ain't no traumas about using commas. They're useful for very short pauses between items and lists, like head, feet and fists, or between coordinated main clauses. Among adjectives too, a comma will do if they qualify in the same way. A wise patient Scot has a comma, but not a dark red rosary. If a word or a phrase interrupts, no delays, put commas around it, won't you? After words like he said, and off the top of my head, around the name of someone spoken to, a semicolon, I'd say, is roughly halfway between a comma and a full stop. You use it in chief when a comma is too brief and a full stop is over the top. A full stop, my friend, means you come to the end unless it's after an abbreviation. Then that little dot means that's not your lot, just to add to your mystification.
Let's move on to some more pieces of punctuation. Firstly, semicolons. Now, the semicolon comes halfway between a full stop and a comma. It's useful for two main purposes. The first is to link two closely related sentences when a full stop would be too strong. Take this bag with you to the shop. You'll need it to bring back the shopping. It can also be used to break up lists. The names of McSporran's entire crew, semicolon. The names of those who survived the voyage, semicolon. Now, colons are stronger than semicolons, but not as strong as full stops. Colons can be used to introduce a list. I enclose the following information, colon, the names of McSporran's entire crew, semicolon, and so on. Colons can also be used to introduce a statement which enlarges on what has just been written. Family size implies that adults could use the pool, colon, I only weigh 9 stones, and so on. Colons can also be used to balance two contrasting statements. Outside the flowers glowed brilliantly, inside they cast a grey gloom. Have you ever written to complain?
Yeah, we wrote to complain about how dirty the telephone boxes were in our area and that there weren't none like working and everything.
I've written a lot of complaints about, to the school, my daughter's school. She's being bullied at school and being wrongly treated by teachers at school, and we felt very strongly, myself and my wife felt very strongly about it.
To a bank manager, yes.
The subject matter of a letter of complaint could be about almost anything. But one of the most important things is that you should actually write the letter. Don't just talk about doing it, but get pen to paper and do it. Now, the tone of a letter of complaint is very important. Although you want to be firm, you should still be as polite as possible. You're unlikely to achieve a positive result if your letter is rude, so your language should be forceful and formal. A letter of complaint could be about a mail order item which was damaged or of poor quality when it arrived. Another complaint could be to a tour operator about an overbooking which caused you to be moved to an alternative hotel where the accommodation might not have been of a comparable standard to the original hotel. It could also be to a neighbour complaining about noise, or perhaps you could be complaining to an electricity company about meter readings which seem particularly high. Before writing the letter, you should find out the name of the person you need to write to. Perhaps it's the area manager or the head of customer services. Well, let's look at the content of a letter complaining about a mail order item ordered from the back pages of a newspaper which doesn't match its description. Now, this is an example of how not to write a letter of complaint. It's been written with too much irrelevant information in it. It clouds what it's really trying to say. There's enough information to put across without adding unnecessary details. Now, writing a letter of complaint like this takes a certain amount of planning in order to end up with a letter which is to the point but still contains all the relevant details. The order in which you give all the details is also very important. You should use formal language in any letter of complaint. Now, if you can't think of the exact words you want, then you could ask someone for advice or use a thesaurus to help you. Before you produce a final letter, you may have several first attempts or drafts. Now, when you're drafting, you should first make a list of all the important points. Then you should number these points in the order you feel is best. Then expand each point into a separate paragraph. And once you've produced a first draft, you can start to refine it by editing words here and there, proofreading it for spelling and punctuation errors, and making sure that the letter says what you want it to say and that it's clear. Here's a letter complaining about the same mail order item, but in a far more concise and ordered manner. You should always post important letters, like a letter of complaint, by recorded delivery, so that you have proof of posting. And you should also make photocopies of everything you've posted. Now, a second type of complaint could be to a neighbouring restaurant complaining about noise disturbance. In a situation like that, you should keep a diary of when the disturbances have taken place and when you've given the offending party a verbal warning, including a record of what's been said during any conversations and who was present at the time. If you send a copy of the letter to someone, you should write CC and then who the copies have been sent to, and write that underneath your name at the left-hand margin. CC means carbon copies. Well, now let's have a quick look at some more punctuation. Inverted commas, or speech marks as they're sometimes known. Inverted commas are always used in pairs, and they can show the actual words which somebody has said. For example, I said, "Please can you leave the restaurant without making so much noise?" Or they can show quotations. I placed the above order on the 6th of August 1992 for a children's inflatable paddling pool described as extra large family size, and so on. Here are some examples for situations where you need to write to a company asking for certain actions to be carried out. You could be asking for the investigation of a credit card statement which contains an item which you haven't authorised. Or it could be to the insurance ombudsman, the insurance watchdog, regarding a car accident you were involved in, where the third party was responsible but is now denying responsibility. Or it could be to your landlord. You may have previously telephoned your landlord to tell him about a damp or rotten window frame which needs to be fixed, and there's been no action. So you would now need to write him a letter asking for action. If you're asking for action from any large organisation, it always helps if you can find out the name of the person who'll be able to help you. This also means that you won't be batted around the company if you phone at a later date. To find out the name of someone who can help you, phone up the company in question and ask the receptionist or the switchboard operator after explaining why you want to write to the company. They may put you through to a customer services department or a similar department, so ask there for a particular name. A letter to a credit card company could look something like this. In the heading, you should give your account number, followed by a number of paragraphs covering all the relevant details. If you're enclosing any pages other than your letter, you should write ENC under your signature at the bottom of your letter. ENC stands for enclosure. ENC followed by the 2 in brackets means you've added 2 enclosures. Now, if you're in dispute with an insurance company regarding a claim, you should then contact the insurance ombudsman. When sending the letter, you should also tell the third party that you're doing so. Quite often, such a letter to a third party will resolve the situation. A standard template for a letter to the insurance ombudsman would look something like this. Firstly, you should say why you're writing. After writing a paragraph to explain what you've enclosed, you should make a list of important points. And you should finish your letter by saying what you'd like the company to do to help you. Our final letter asking for action is one that you might address to a landlord. Now, this type of letter must be concise and ordered. You should list the history of events which have occurred and problems which may need resolving. And finish your letter by saying what action you would like him or her to take and what you would be prepared to do should your letter be ignored. Now, dashes can be used in pairs like this. We, dash, the Hearts and myself, have recently received letters from your department requiring access to our flats, and so on. Single dashes can show either a break in thought, we arrived home late, dash, but that's a long story, or they can show an expectant pause, just as we arrived home, dash, a man ran out of the front door. Dashes should be used sparingly. They are useful, but they shouldn't be used instead of other more suitable punctuation marks. Now, before you begin to write any letter, it is a good idea to make a list of the main points you want to include. So let's cover the sort of things that you should be looking for when you're drafting letters. First of all, is the letter complete? Does it say everything you want it to say? Does it include all essential information like dates, names, reference numbers, and so on? Here is a letter which has been written without much thought. It's very woolly in places. But here is a letter about exactly the same subject after it's been properly drafted and checked to make sure that the letter is complete, with all the correct information and requests for action. Secondly, is it concise and clear? Is it to the point? Is it repetitive? Could you use one word instead of several? Does the letter contain irrelevant material which should be edited out? Is the information ordered in the best way possible? This is an example of a badly organised letter which contains a lot of irrelevant information. Notice all the asides which have been written into the text. And this is a letter about the same subject after it has been drafted and properly checked to make sure that it's clear and concise. Thirdly, is it courteous? Does it give the right impression? Is the tone polite, even if being firm? This letter has been written using a fairly aggressive tone. But here is the same letter about the same subject, but this time written in a more courteous way. And fourthly, is it correct? Is the layout correct? Is it neat and legible? Check spelling, punctuation and grammar. Use a dictionary if you're not too sure. Could you improve the vocabulary you've used with a thesaurus? Are you actually happy with the letter? If not, then why not? And what can you do to make it better? Now, this letter has been scribbled with untidy writing and without any layout. And here is a letter with the same information, but this time it's been written neatly and has been checked for any errors in spelling, layout, and so on. Now you should continue to draft and redraft until you are happy with the final outcome. There isn't one absolutely correct letter for each situation. You should use your own flair to individualise your letters and alter them to suit your situation. Try to avoid using overused words like nice. Find other more appropriate and more descriptive words. Use a thesaurus to help you if you'd like. When we write something which will be seen by other people, we usually check it to see if the spelling and punctuation are correct, and this is called proofreading or editing. When you check, you should read your writing as if you haven't seen it before. That way, you'll read what's there and not what you think is there. If you have a computer, proofreading will be much easier, as most word processing packages contain a spell checker, a built-in dictionary. The only trouble with those is that they sometimes check for American spelling, which does vary from English spelling, so beware. When proofreading, make sure the letter looks and sounds the way you want it to, and that it has correct spelling and punctuation. And once you feel happy with your final draft, ask a friend to read it and to make their comments. Now all of this may take a long time, but I promise you it is worth it in the end. Well, I really hope that you have found this video helpful and, having watched it through once, now feel confident to tackle virtually any letter writing situation which you may find yourself in. Remember, don't expect to become good at letter writing instantaneously. The most important thing is to keep practicing and you will get better. Of course, you can practice by writing all those letters you've been meaning to write to all those long-lost friends and relations. Remember that if there is anything you don't feel sure of at any time while you're writing a letter, just refer back to the right section in the video and pause a while to take in the information. You can use any of our letters as templates or masters to change to suit your purposes.